Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 33, my overview for Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth, the new Magic the Gathering set that is coming to Arena on June 20th. Usually I discuss a drafting strategy for a specific color pair or archetype, but today I will be covering my favorite commons and uncommons, going over the set's mechanics, and what each archetype is trying to do in a broad sense. The flavor of this set is on point, and as a big Tolkien fan, I am excited to tell you all about my favorite cards. First up, we have the Ring Emblem. Not a card, but the main new mechanic for the set. Any card that reads "The Ring Tempts You" triggers this, giving you the first item on the list, and then on down until you have all four. The abilities stack. So first, you pick a creature to be a ring bearer, making it legendary, which is important because there are a fair number of legendary synergies in the set, and then the creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. The second ability is whenever your ring bearer attacks, you draw a card and discard a card, also called looting, which is important because there are some cards that trigger off drawing your second card in a turn. Third, whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked, the blocker is sacrificed at the end of combat. And last, whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. This opens up some interesting lines, such as giving your own creature negative power so that it can't be blocked because of ability 1, but still hits your opponent for 3 because of ability 4, if you pump it afterwards. A slight flavor miss since the Ring Tempts You has no downsides, other than potentially milling yourself out from looting. The first common that I would like to highlight is Hobbit's Sting. An instant for 1 and a white, you deal X damage to target creature, where X is the number of creatures you control, plus the number of foods you control. We've seen food before. It's an artifact where you tap 2 colorless, tap the artifact, and sacrifice it to gain 3 life. The archetype that cares the most about food synergies is green-white, or Celestia, but even without food, white is also good at producing cheap creatures, so I believe this will be a highly sought-after spell. Next up we have Protector of Gondor, a 3/3 for 3 and a white that creates a 1/1 human token when it enters the battlefield. A 4/4 worth of stats over 2 bodies. I'm a fan of cards that create additional bodies, and white is looking to take advantage of tokens. Next up we have Second Breakfast. For 2 and a white, you give up to 2 target creatures +2/+1 until end of turn, and create a food token. This is a good way to hit for 4 damage by going wide, and it hits 2 targets, so they have to kill both to fizzle your spell. That's it for the commons, and I think one of the problems with white is that most of the power lies at the uncommon level. But what it lacks in commons, it certainly makes up for at the uncommon level, bringing 7 that caught my attention. First up, we have Éowyn, Lady of Rohan, a 2/4 legendary creature for 2 and a white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature gains your choice of First Strike or Vigilance until end of turn. If it's equipped, it gains First Strike and Vigilance until end of turn instead, and equip abilities cost 1 less to activate. There are a couple equipments in the set that synergize with this, but even without equipment, the 2/4 body blocks early aggression while giving your creature's First Strike to keep the pressure up. Faramir, Field Commander, a legendary creature. You'll notice a fair number of legendary creatures in the set, especially at uncommon rarity and higher. Faramir is a 3/3 for 3 and a white. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, draw a card. Whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Faramir, Field Commander, as your ring bearer, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Going wide tends to lead to some casualties as your forces clash against your opponent's defenses, and this lets you draw a card. It also creates a 1/1 as long as you have a second creature to make your ring bearer, which goes with the token generation go wide theme of white. Landroval, Horizon Witness, is a 3/4 flyer for 5. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until end of turn. The ability can trigger the turn that you play it, and give you that little bit of evasion to get that lethal damage through. Rosie, Cotton of South Lane, also looks like a top uncommon to me. another legendary creature, and a 1/1 for 3, but she creates a food token when she enters the battlefield. And whenever you create a token, any kind of token, not just food, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. This can add up quick since white is good at creating 1/1 tokens as well as food. Samwise the Stout-Hearted, another legendary, is a 2/1 for 2 with flash. Whenever Sam enters the battlefield, choose up to one target permanent in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, return it to your hand. Then the ring tempts you. So this is an example of the card that will trigger the ring emblem from earlier. I think blue-white or Azorius looks set up to be the best ring bearer archetype, but you'll find synergies throughout all of the archetypes. Shire Sheriff, oh look, it's not a legendary, is a 2/2 for 2 with Vigilance. When Shire Sheriff enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a token. When you do, exile target creature an opponent controls until Shire Sheriff leaves the battlefield. You'll be hard-pressed to create a food token on turn 1, but a 2/2 that turns into removal later in the game definitely caught my attention. And last, we have Tale of Tinuvel. An enchantment saga without read ahead, so you can't skip chapters, starts with target creature you control gains indestructible for as long as you control Tale of Tinuvel. Second chapter returns target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, and remember the second ability off the ring emblem is looting, so you can purposely ditch something to reanimate it later. You also have the Plane Cycler at common that synergizes nicely with this. And the third chapter, up to 2 target creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. White might be too aggressive for this type of card, but there is certainly enough going on with this card that I'm excited to try it. Now for blue, and we see an old favorite, Essence Scatter with additional upside. For 1 and a blue, you counter target creature spell. If it was legendary, the ring tempts you. The set feels a bit aggressive to me, so it's possible counterspells will just get run over, but I've enjoyed Essence Scatter in the past, and there are enough legendaries in the set that you can get the bonus of advancing the ring emblem. Blue-black, or Dimir, looks to be the most controlling archetype, but I imagine you'll see this in most blue archetypes. Isolation at Ornthonk also caught my eye. For 3 and a blue, you put target creature into owner's library, second from the top. The importance for me is that this affects amass tokens. Blue has several bounce effects, but most of them list non-token, since, as we'll get to, one of the mechanics in the set is amass, which creates a 0/0 token that gets bigger each time that you amass. This, after your opponent has spent several turns amassing a large orc army, you can just remove it for 4. It'll be handy in the sideboard at the very least, but I imagine it will be main deck playable. Speaking of bounce, Soothing of Smeagol returns target non-token creature to its owner's hand, and the ring tempts you for 1 and a blue. Although you can't bounce your opponent's amassed army, I've really enjoyed 1 or 2 cost bounce, and having the ring tempts you I think will be important, especially for white-blue or Azorius. Willowind also caught my attention. A 3/4 flyer for 5 is not the best stat block, but when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. Green-blue, or Simic, is all about scry triggers, so there's some immediate synergies there, but I often equate scry 2 to drawing a card, so even if you don't have scry synergies, I think you'll still want this as your top end in blue. Now for the blue uncommons. The Bath Song is what I'm looking for if I'm in Dimir control, and I can't wait to watch Sam Black destroy someone by running an egregious amount of control and creating an infinite library with this card. For 3 and a blue, you get an Enchantment Saga, Chapters 1 and 2 draw 2 cards and discard a card, while Chapter 3 shuffles any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library and gives you 2 blue. Bill Ferny, Bree Swindler, also made my list. A legendary creature, 2/1 for 1 and a blue. Whenever Bill becomes blocked, create a treasure token. The second option is mostly flavor text, since there are only 2 horses, one being Shadowfax, which you aren't giving away, but it's still wonderful flavor. The second ability of the ring emblem triggers loot, but only if you attack. Bill encourages your opponent to let that happen multiple turns, or you get a treasure token out of it. Council's Deliberation caught my eye. For 1 and a blue, you draw a card, especially good if you are in blue-red or is it spells, and then whenever you scry, if you control an island, you can exile Council's Deliberation to draw a card. Blue-green is the scry archetype, but there are enough cards with scry that you'll easily be able to trigger this for a second card. Speaking of scry, Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, is a 3/2 legendary creature for 2 and a blue. Whenever Elrond or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, the ring tempts you. Elrond has great synergies in the elf blue-green scry deck, but I think with 1/1 human token generation from white, you can also trigger this and potentially get more synergies off of the ring tempts you. Gandalf, Friend of the Shire, is a 2/4 legendary creature for 3 and a blue with flash, and you can cast sorceries as though they had flash, but the ability that really caught my attention was whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Gandalf as your ring bearer, you draw a card. Blue-red and blue-black are looking like the Spells Matter archetypes. The flash on the creature can eat an unsuspecting 2/2 or 3/2, and if being tempted by the ring wasn't good enough, the card draw should put it over the top. Menaldor, Swift Savior, is a 3/3 legendary creature with flying for 3 and a blue. Whenever Menaldor, Swift Savior, deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. You'll need interesting enter the battlefield effects to capitalize off the blink. Cards that trigger Ring Temptation come to mind, since evasion from flying and the 4th level ring emblem looks to be a thing for white-blue or Azorius. My last blue uncommon is Saruman the White, a 4/4 legendary for 4 and a blue with Ward 2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, amass Orcs 2. Finally, we get to a card with amass. We've seen this mechanic before, but instead of zombies, this time it's orcs. You create a 0/0 black orc army creature token, and then put +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amass. The theme for blue-black or Dimir is controlling spells that also amass, which I think will be this card's home, but you are generally looking to 2-spell in Magic, and getting a 2/2 worth of value each time you do it seems good to me. Now for black. Claim the Precious is 1 double-pip black, destroy target creature, but at sorcery speed. And then the ring tempts you. I think black looks like the weakest color. Black-red or Rakdos and blue-black or Dimir are both going to struggle with their amass tokens getting removed. Rakdos less so because red looks very strong. And green-black is looking to ramp into expensive treefolk and might also struggle with removal, while Orsov is about creating and sacrificing small tokens, but I worry about it getting run over by the aggressive strategies of green-white or Celestia Food, or red-white of the Boros legendary aggro. If you're going to be in black, though, you'll definitely want this at removal, at common, and it also triggers the ring emblem. Easterling Vanguard caught my eye as a 2/1 for 1 and a black that amasses for 1 when it dies. I was surprised to see essentially a 3/2 for 2 over 2 bodies at common, and you'll want to if you're in the aggressive strategies of Rakdos, and it gives you 2 sacrifice targets if you are in Orsov. Shelob's Ambush also made me excited since green has some creatures with trample. For one black, target creature gets +1/+2 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Create a food token. And the food token is a hobbit wrapped in spider silk. 1-cost combat tricks tend to do well in limited since it is easy to keep the mana untapped, and I'm very excited to play this on a big creature with trample, which isn't just limited to green, by the way, and overrun my opponent's defenses. Now for the uncommons. Bitter Downfall is a great payoff for deciding to play with black. 3 and a black to destroy target creature, ping your opponent for 2, and it costs 3 less if the creature was dealt damage this turn, all at instant speed. Only a single pip is nice as well, since if I do play with black, I'm hoping it is my secondary color. Golem, Patient Plotter caught my eye. A legendary 3/1 for 1 and a black. When it leaves the battlefield, the ring tempts you. And you can tap black, sacrifice a creature, return Golem from your graveyard to your hand, activate only as a sorcery. Rakdos, Steal and Sacrifice is an archetype. The Treachery or Treason is at uncommon in this set, and comes in the form of a creature, which we'll cover when we get to red. But it's because there are a plethora of sacrifice triggers. A recurring 3/1 also makes me think of Orzhov, which cares the most about creatures leaving the battlefield, but I've liked the 3/1 stat block for 2, and I'm guessing it will make its way into many black decks. Golem's Bite is also looking pretty appealing. For a single black, you give target creature -2/2. There are a fair number of grizzly bears in the set, and black needs something to stall to the later parts of the game. Then for 3 and a black, you can exile it from your graveyard to trigger the ring emblem, and if you draw it later in the game, it's a good target to just loot out of your hand via the ring emblem. Gothmog, Morgul Lieutenant, is a legendary 3/3 for 3 and a black. When Gothmog enters the battlefield, amass Orcs 1. So you get a 4/4 worth of stats across 2 bodies, and Gothmog gives your creature tokens Death Touch. Good for Orzhov as well, because those 1/1 tokens become much better blockers with Death Touch. Nazgul is a 1/2 Death Touch that when it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever the ring tempts you, put a +1/+1 counter on each Wraith you control. A deck can have up to 9 cards named Nazgul. Usually in Limited, there is no limit to the amount of cards that you can have in your deck, but like 7 Dwarves from Throne of Eldraine, the text trumps that rule, and yes, you can only have 9. This really shines if you get multiples, and it might be a thing if everyone ends up fighting over blue and green cards. Now for red, and what I think looks like the strongest color in the set. Erebor Flamesmith is a 2/1 for 1 and a red that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Erebor Flamesmith deals 1 damage to each opponent. We've seen this before as a 1/3 with Kessig Flamebreather, and it's going to be a cornerstone common for blue-red, or is it, spells, which is the archetype I'm most excited to play. Gimli's Fury is a combat trick for 1 and a red that gives target creature +3/+2 until end of turn, but if it's legendary, it also gains trample until end of turn. I think you're really going to want the legendary, but with Ring Bearers being legendary, as well as all of the legendary creatures in the set, I don't think that this will be hard to pull off. Improvised Club is an instant for 1 and a red that is, as an additional cost, you have to sacrifice an artifact or creature. Another reason why they made the Treason of the set less powerful, and it deals 4 damage to any target. The fact that this can hit face is going to be important. Rally at the Hornburg is a sorcery for 1 and a red that creates 2 1/1 white human soldier tokens, and humans you control gain haste until end of turn. Boros is about going wide, and the fact that they have haste is going to be a lot of early pressure on your opponent if they are dirtling until turn 3. Rush the Room also caught my attention as another 1-cost combat trick. For 1 red, you give target creature +1/+0 and it gains first strike until end of turn. This and Shelob's Ambush are going to make how you decide to block pretty tricky. And if it's a goblin or an orc, it also gains haste until end of turn. Smite the Deathless is an instant for 1 and a red that deals 3 damage to target creature. That creature loses indestructible until end of turn, and if it would die, it's exiled instead. It would have been too much for them to print Incinerate and let this go face, I guess. This looks like premium red removal at common, and I'll be looking to pick these up. Finally, a color with more than 4 commons that I'm excited about. The final common that caught my eye was Warbeast of Gorgoroth, a 5/4 for 4 and a red that whenever it or another creature you control with power 4 or greater dies, amass Orcs 2. So a 7/6 worth of stats across 2 bodies for 5 at common? Yes, please. The red-green or Gruul archetype seems to have minimal synergies around power 4 or greater as well. The amass synergies are mostly in black-red or Rakdos, but Rakdos seems to be very aggressive, so we'll see if this makes the cut or if it turns out to be too expensive. Now for the uncommons. Eomer of the Riddermark is a 5/4 legendary creature with haste for 4 and a red. Whenever Eomer attacks, if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. This is more of my kind of top end for an aggressive deck. It can attack the turn that it's played, and unless your opponent has a 5-power creature, it's going to immediately create a 1/1 that will help you chump if you are racing your opponent. Chimney Rabble, a 3/3 with haste that spawned a 1/1, was a top performer in Phyrexia All Will Be One, and I bet this will be as well. At least they made it an uncommon. Erkenbrand, Lord of Westfold, is a 3/3 legendary for 3 and a red. Whenever Erkenbrand or another human enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Erkenbrand, followed by Eomer on turn 5, is where dreams are made. 7/4 haste and a +2 board pump? Yes, please. Boros is looking to go wide, and is looking like a very strong archetype to me. Fear Fire Foes. X and a red to deal X damage to target creature, and 1 damage to each other creature with the same controller. Heat Rays tend to trade down in value, but the fact that this deals 1 damage to their board will be absolutely devastating to Boros and Orsov, which aim to have a high number of 1/1 tokens. Fiery Inscription is the card I'm most excited for in the set, an enchantment for 2 and a red that triggers the ring emblem when it enters the battlefield, and then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to your opponent. It'll be a bit of a balancing act since you have to take a turn off developing the board, but as long as you've built your strategy around this card, there are enough 1 and 2 cost cycling spells in blue, and enough burn that can hit directly to face in red to really make this shine. Grishnak, Brash Instigator, is a 1/1 for 2 and a red, and is the treason of the set. That's right, they made it a creature. When Grishnak enters the battlefield, amass Orcs 2, so you're still getting a 3/3 worth of value over 2 bodies. Then you gain control of target non-legendary creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the amassed army's power. Untap that creature and it gains haste until end of turn. I'm glad to see that they heavily restricted the steal and sack in this set, since there are so many sacrifice outlets. Improvised Club, for example, doesn't even need to beat in Rakdos. Ranger's Firebrand is a shock, but at sorcery speed. For 1 red, you deal 2 damage to any target, including face. This is the sort of thing you want to do if you have the Fiery Inscription blue-red Izzet spells deck, and you get to advance the ring emblem as well. Now for green, the second best color in my opinion. Gruul, or red-green, doesn't have a lot of signposts or synergies, and I believe it's because it's the 2 best colors and it didn't really need any. Only time will tell if I'm right. Dagon Porter is a 4/4 for 3 and a green that gets +X/+X whenever it attacks, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. My practice drafts have sometimes come up short on legendaries. I think you want at least 7, including cards that trigger the ring, but in the worst case, it's just a 4/4 for 4, which is a totally fine stat block by me. Enraged Hjorn is a 4/5 trample for 4 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Golgari is ramp and treefolk, so I was very happy to see this guy at common, especially with Shelob's ambushed at common as well. Let the Death Touch trample begin. Galadrim Guide is a 3/4 for 3 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2. I'm much more interested in this and cards that generate scry if I'm in Simic and doing the Scrying Elves archetype, but I think scry 2 is also close to drawing a card, so a 3/4 for 4 that sorta draws a card, yes please, even outside of Simic. Woe's Pathfinder is the mana dork of the set, a 1/1 for 1 and a green that taps for any color and then has a late game mana sink for 7 to give target creature +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. Sure, especially if you were splashing for an off-color bomb or trying to ramp to expensive treefolk in Golgari. Now for the uncommons. Celeborn the Wise is a 3/3 legendary creature for 3 and a green that whenever you attack with 1 or more elves, scry 1. And whenever you scry, Celeborn gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each card looked at while scrying this way. Simic is looking very strong, but not very deep, so I think it will be important to prioritize scry triggers, especially ones that can trigger multiple turns, instead of the cards that benefit off of the scry. Focus on your enablers first, and things should work out if it's open at the table. Dunedain Rangers is a 4/4 for 3 and a green with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you don't control a ring bearer, the ring tempts you. I like the 4/4 stat block for 4. I'm a little torn on whether or not to include this one, because I think 1/1 tokens seem to do better, to be better ring bearers, and the red-green Gruul has some synergies around 4 power, so I decided to include it. Long List of the Ints is such great flavor. You play a Saga on turn 1 for a green that is still rambling about by turn 6. I think red-green Gruul has the most potential to be a menagerie of different creature types. If you can get even 2 +1/+1 counters, I think this will be worth it, let alone if you can get 3 or more. You won't want it if you are tribal halflings in green-white or elves in blue-green. It also synergizes with Tom Bombadil, the 5-color Wooburg meme of the set, which gets indestructible as long as a Saga is in play. Miradoc Brandybuck is a 2/2 legendary creature for 1 and a green, and whenever 1 or more halflings you control attack, create a food token. If you are green-white, Celestia, you will want this card. Even just a 2/2 for 2 that creates a food when it attacks seems good enough in most green decks. Paragon Took is another one that I'll have to try out before my final verdict. I included it because there are some interesting synergies putting this in a deck that isn't strictly about food, since it triggers on any token. A 2/3 legendary for 2 and a green needs to be doing something useful with the food to make it worth it, and maybe sacrificing 3 foods to draw a card is enough. Quick Beam Upstart Int is a 5/6 legendary for 4 double pip green that whenever Quick Beam or another tree folk enters the battlefield under your control, up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. This is the payoff for doing the Golgari tree folk thing. +4/+4 and trample on a 5/6 body for 6 should really push some damage through. Shortcut to Mushrooms. 1 and a green for an enchantment that triggers the ring emblem, and at the beginning of your instep, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, like food tokens perhaps, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This one will also be a bit of a balancing act, since in the aggressive food deck you don't want to take turn 2 off from developing the board, but as long as it isn't your turn to play, I think it will give you enough to be worthwhile. Stew the Conies is the green bite spell of the set. For 2 and a green, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Create a food token. There's a fair amount of death touch to pair with this, but it will have the caveat of being blown out by your opponent's removal. Green has limited removal, and especially the green-blue scrying elf archetype will need this for some much-needed spot removal. Now for the artifacts. Only one made my list, and that is Mirror of Galadriel. I think hitting 2 or 3 legendaries should be very doable in this set. The problem is I'm not sure that it's true for the control archetype of blue-black Dimir, where I think this would be the most at home. There are a fair number of legendary elves, though, so maybe its home is as a repeatable scry outlet in Simic. Now for what we've all been waiting for, or at least what I'm the most excited for, the multicolored gold cards. Arwen and Gomnil is the Simic signpost. For a green and a blue, you get a 2/2 that whenever you scry, you put a +1/+1 on target creature. And if things get really tough, you can tap 6 to scry 2. Simic is looking for all of the scry synergies, and this fits perfectly into the archetype. Celestia is all about food tokens, And Butterbur, Bree, Innkeeper is a 3/3 for 2 and a green and a white. At the beginning of your instep, if you don't control a food, create a food. I plan to use the food tokens liberally to fuel my hungry army of halflings, and this makes sure that there is always at least one food. Orsov is about killing your own creatures, especially miserable 1/1 humans and orc armies, before they get big. Denethor, Ruling Steward, is a 2/4 for 1 and a white and a black. At the beginning of your instep, if a creature died under your control this turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. 2 colorless to sacrifice another creature, and each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Orsov is usually about attrition, but I think the archetype looks decently aggressive, where you plan to get early damage in and then finish your opponent off through sacrificing tokens for 1 damage. Gruul feels like it has the least amount of synergies in the set. Friendly Rivalry is an instant for a red and a green that targets 2 creatures you control, as long as 1 is legendary, and they each deal their power to target creature you don't control. Tandem Takedown worked well enough in March of the Machine, especially since it targets 2 creatures, so it's harder for your opponent to fizzle with their own removal. And Gruul wants big creatures with power 4 or greater, so they should bite well. Izzet is all about those spells. Gandalf's Sanction deals X damage to target creature, where X is the number of instant and sorceries in your graveyard, for 1, a blue, and a red. Excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. It's going to take a bit to charge this up, but there are a fair number of cheap blue spells that cycle that I'm aiming to play in this archetype, and this can hit for a lot of damage if you shoot a 1/1 token. Rakdos is all about amassing orcs and aggression. Marhur Uruk-hai Captain is a 2/2 legendary for a black and a red with menace, and whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on an army, goblin, or orc, you put an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Increasing all of your counters by 1 worked well with Kami of Whispered Hopes in Celestia counters during March of the Machine, and there are enough cards with the mass in red and black that I think that this will play out similarly. The 2/2 Menace is also great at early aggression and pairs nicely with Rush the Room for some first strike when they do muster enough to block. Golgari is about ramp and treefolk. Old Man Willow is a star-starred legendary treefolk with power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever Old Man Willow attacks, you may sacrifice another creature or a token. When you do, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. There is a card that ramps the number of lands that you have in play, essentially a more random explosive vegetation for 3, but it sets you up for 5 mana on turn 5 because you have to sacrifice one of the lands. So this will more often than not just be a 4/4 for 4 that grows from there. Azorius is looking to create tokens, advance the ring emblem, and throw in a little bit of eagles. Just imagine a level 4 ring emblem on a flyer. This is what Azorius is about. Prince Imrahil the Fair is a 2/2 legendary for a white and a blue that whenever you draw your second card each turn, the loot from the level 2 ring emblem comes to mind. Create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Dimir is the most controlling archetype, looking to win through attrition by playing blue and black spells that hinder your opponent while amassing an army of orcs. Think Saruman building an army worthy of Mordor. Ring Sight is a sorcery for 1, a blue and a black that triggers the ring emblem and lets you search your library for a card that shares a color with a legendary creature you control. The fact it triggers the ring emblem means that if you have a creature, you have a legendary. I'm a little worried about the aggression of the set for attrition, but if there is a control deck, Dimir Bathhouse is where it will be. Golgari is about ramp and expensive treefolk. Rise of the Witch King is a sorcery for 2 and a black and a green. Each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrifice a creature this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. With the looting ability from the ring emblem, it shouldn't be incredibly difficult to set up turn 2 ring emblem, turn 3 ring emblem, and attack to trigger loot, discard huge tree folk, turn 4, reanimate big tree folk. Boros is about going wide, but there's also a sub-theme of legendary creatures with haste. Shadowfax, Lord of Horses, is a 4/4 legendary for 3, a red and a white, that gives all your horses haste, and whenever Shadowfax attacks, you put a creature with lesser power from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. There is one other horse, Bill the Pony, but the flavor of this card is on point. Show us the meaning of haste, silly wizards of the coast. Strider, Ranger of the North, is the only signpost for Gruul. For 2, a red and a green, you get a 4/4 with landfall. Give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn. Technically, you could give your opponent's creature the +1/+1 so that your Ringbearer goes unblocked, and then if it has power 4 or greater, it gains first strike until end of turn. I think green and especially red look to be the 2 strongest colors, so I imagine Gruul will be more about the good cards rather than building off of synergies. Theoden, King of Rohan, fits the go-wide aggro strategy of Boros as well. A 2/3 legendary for 1, a red and a white. Whenever Theoden or another human enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. A 4th level ring emblem also deals 3 damage every time the Ringbearer deals damage to a player, so with double strike, that would pop for 6. Rakdos also had another signpost uncommon that caught my eye, Ugluk of the White Hand. For 2 and a black and a red, you get a 3/3 legendary that whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Ugluk. If that creature was a goblin or orc, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Ugluk instead. A little payoff for all the sacrifice outlets in Rakdos. In summary, my color ranking is red, green, blue, white, black. Red looks deep enough to support multiple people at the table and is very aggressive. Green is all about synergies. Whether you are ramping to expensive treefolk in Golgari, or scrying with Simic elves, or making food in Celestia, green has some very important pieces to make those archetypes work. Blue has a ton of scry for Simic, cheap spells to cycle for Izzet, and a 2-cost counterspell that breathes hope into Dimir control. White is about food tokens and 1/1 human tokens, and looks very aggressive. Orsov is looking to sacrifice them, Azorius is looking to make ring bearers, Boros is looking to overrun your opponent, and Celestia is looking to sacrifice food for early aggression. I would rate white higher, but much of its power is at the uncommon level. And last place goes to black. Black has good removal, no surprises there, but with many of the creatures creating 2 bodies when they enter the battlefield, I think spot removal will feel a little lackluster. I think spot removal will also have a hard time keeping up with scry, and maybe scrying to your removal will make Dimir work as a control deck. Either way, black looks best as a support color outside of Rakdos and mass aggression. Next week, I'll be diving into one of the archetypes in greater detail after I've had a chance to play the set. Look for it on the 27th. I hope you found this guide useful in preparing for pre-release over the weekend, or for preparing when the set drops on the 20th. Please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It helps me reach new people, and maybe one day I'll be big enough to get early access. Thank you for enjoying my guide to Lord of the Rings. Good luck with your games and future trophies. Thank you all for the support, and I will see you next week.